As you learned earlier, there are no obvious visual tells that someone is an abuser. There are, however, identifiers that may indicate when a child has been a victim of sexual abuse. Throughout this session, you will learn some of the possible short-term and long-term effects we might see in children who have been or are being sexually abused.
As we continue on the journey of becoming well-informed gatekeepers, it's important that we recognize some of the impacts of sexual abuse on the children that we care for, both in short-term and long-term context. So here are some of the short-term impacts you may see in children who've been sexually abused. First of all, poor self-care. This might show up as a lack of basic hygiene. A child isn't taking care of themselves in an age-appropriate way. Bedwetting, if bedwetting hasn't been an issue in the past, if it's a new behavior. A sudden weight change can be an indication of child sexual abuse. Fears or phobias, especially night terrors or nightmares, particularly if this is a new issue or a new experience for the child. Self-mutilation or cutting, this is a very common response to child sexual abuse. And for many years, cutting was something occurring primarily in female abuse survivors. But we've begun to see a large-scale occurrence of male victims participating in cutting behaviors. In the past, it was assumed that when a child was cutting, it was a cry for help. When this is true, the cutting is usually in an obvious location on the body. However, we've begun to see circumstances where children are cutting in places that are not easily seen, on the inner thigh or under an armpit or in a location that undergarments would cover. In these cases, cutting may be a response to disassociation or as a coping mechanism, as an attempt by the child to see that he or she can actually still feel. Okay, back to the list. A disinterest in a person or an activity that he or she previously enjoyed can be a short-term impact. Difficulty walking or sitting. With some children, sexual abuse has physical ramifications that make it difficult for them to walk or sit. Itching in the genital area or anal area is another physical ramification. A startled response to touch, responding to normal physical affection or touch. Sexual play with toys or with himself or herself or with others. Sexualized play can be an indication of child sexual abuse. And last on the short-term list, we might see explicit drawings or descriptions that a child should not be familiar with at that age. These can be an indication that a child has been sexually abused. Now let's move to some of the long-term impacts we might see. First on my list is depression. There is a significant correlation between child sexual abuse and depression occurring later in life. Suicidal thoughts or acts. Many individuals who've suffered child sexual abuse have either contemplated or actually attempted to take their own lives. In victims of abuse, eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia are typically an effort to regain a sense of control over their bodies. We sometimes also see substance abuse, which can include legalized drugs or illegal drugs, or self-medicating behaviors, including alcohol, which are utilized as coping mechanisms to deal with what occurred in the past. Typically, we see a drop in academic performance with children who've been sexually victimized. So a 2-lettered grade drop is common, where A's become C's and B's become D's. And this generally correlates with the time frame of the child's abuse. Sometimes we see promiscuity or seductive behaviors, children utilizing their physical form to get attention. Children who were victimized may no longer have the same sense of innocence that they had in the past. Another long-term impact can be venereal diseases. Children can be exposed through sexual contact with their abuser and contract a venereal disease. Sometimes we see excessive modesty in a child after the fact, and this is particularly true with female abuse survivors, who will layer themselves up in clothing as they move into their early and middle teen years. And finally, prostitution is one of the long-term impacts we may see. One study indicates that nearly 98% of male and female prostitutes say they were sexually abused as children.
As challenging as it may be to truly grasp, these lists detail a heartbreaking reality for children who have been sexually abused. But with this knowledge, you are better equipped to see when there might be cause for concern. Next, you'll learn about legal requirements for reporting abuse so that you can be an even better advocate for children.